Every society tells foundational stories. Stories meant to help people understand who they are as a people, where they come from, and what they value. In America, our foundational story is of the Pilgrims fleeing persecution and setting up a land of religious freedom. Colonists fighting for democracy, overcoming all odds to create a land of opportunity. We tell this particular story because it helps reinforce what our values are and who we want to be. Scholars call these foundational stories myths, since they are primarily about conveying beliefs. For Latter-day Saints, the creation story in Genesis 1 is precisely this kind of myth. The story is used and reused in the Old Testament, the Book of Moses, the Book of Abraham, and in the Temple, not to teach the science of creation, but to help modern believers understand their origins, covenants, and relationship with God. In ancient Israel, this story served a similar purpose. Let's figure out what ancient Israel valued. To start, notice how much the story centers around putting things in their proper order. The world begins as a watery chaos. God spends Genesis 1 separating, dividing, naming, and ordering. On day 1, he separates the light from darkness. On day 2, he separates the sky from the sea. And on day 3, he separates the land from the water. Notice how he doesn't create the land or the sky. Instead, he gathers, divides, and separates. Now that he has created 3 environments, he then populates them. Since he created light and darkness on day 1, on day 4 he creates the sun, moon, and stars. Just as he divided the sky and sea on day 2, on day 5 he creates the birds and fish. And corresponding to the dry land from day 3, on day 6 he creates humans and animals. God can then rest now that everything is fully ordered. Even the words of the story are highly structured. Every day begins, "And God said." He separates, he names, he pronounces it good, and "there was evening and there was morning," the number day. Order and separation mattered for the Israelites. The law of Moses was centered around everything being in its proper place, and crossing boundaries was forbidden. The law forbid people from mixing 2 kinds of seeds in the same field, making clothing out of mixed materials, or eating animals that did not stay in their proper place, like birds that eat meat or fish that don't have scales. This ordered worldview is enshrined in the creation, where everything reproduces after its own kind, and everything is in its proper sphere. Genesis 1 was written down after the Israelites had been conquered by the Babylonians and had been carried away into Babylon. The Babylonians had a creation myth too, one that starts with a watery chaos and a speaking God, and ends with human creation and a temple. Let's take a look at this myth. First, chaos and water. Out of this chaos, a sea monster named Tiamat gives birth to all the gods. Soon, a war breaks out between Tiamat and her children, and the god Marduk steps forward to save the gods. To prove his power, he shows them how he creates by simply speaking, and all the gods agree to make him their king. Marduk goes to battle against Tiamat. He throws the wind at her, and it forces her mouth open and thrashes inside her. Marduk delivers the killing blow by shooting his arrow deep into her mouth. He splits her body in half, using half to make the dome over the sky and half to make the earth. He creates humans to serve the gods. Finally, he creates a temple in Babylon from which he rules over the world. The Israelites that lived in Babylon knew this creation story. They had heard it. It was as common as the Pilgrim story is for us. So the author of Genesis adapted it. Let's look back at the Genesis story. It opens with the same scene, with a watery chaos and a wind from God thrashing over the face of the deep. In fact, the word deep is the Hebrew word for Tiamat. God creates by speaking, and splits the deep in half to divide the world between the waters that were above the dome and the waters that were under the dome. Israel's God was so powerful that he created the great sea monsters. Marduk created humans to be servants to the gods. But in Genesis, God gives humankind a much more elevated status, to have dominion over the whole earth. Rather than create a temple as the most sacred spot on earth, God in Genesis creates a sacred time, the Sabbath. The reason the Israelite priests rewrote the Babylonian story is because they didn't have a temple. It had been destroyed years earlier. All they had left were their purity rituals and the Sabbath. These were central to what it meant to be Jewish in a foreign land. So the priestly author wrote this story to show that these ideas were central to the very way God had made the world. The structure and repetition in the story even make it feel like a temple ritual. The priestly author wanted to show that even though Babylon had conquered Israel, Israel's God was still stronger. Though Babylon ruled for now, Israel's God would ultimately reign supreme. In short, just as Latter-day Saints used this story mythically, so the ancient Israelites used it to understand their values and their place in the world around them. Thanks for watching, and if you want to learn more, you can find the link in the description to the Old Testament for Latter-day Saints.